What's up, psychedelic investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks. In this episode, we're going to be doing our This Week in Psychedelic Stocks for the trading week ended on March 19th. And as always, first we're going to look at the news that affects the wider industry as a whole, and then we're going to zoom in on company-specific news. If you enjoy this episode, invest in the channel with your like and subscribe. Over time, you'll see your investment grow as we continue to bring you the information that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines space. Enjoy the episode. Our first story of the day comes from Australia. Their government has announced it's going to pour 15 million Australian dollars, and that's around 11.5 million American dollars, into clinical trials using psychedelics like magic mushrooms, ketamine, and MDMA to see if they can help treat debilitating mental health issues such as PTSD, depression, addiction, and eating disorders. And they are doing this because, in the words of their health minister, a man by the name of Greg Hunt, the early results of psychedelic medicine trials in Australia and internationally are extremely encouraging, but more research is desperately needed before these approaches can be used by psychiatrists outside of controlled clinical trials. This grant opportunity will boost local research into potentially life-saving therapies and offer hope for all of those suffering from mental illnesses, including our veterans and emergency service personnel dealing with these devastating effects of PTSD. So this is important for two reasons. First, any increase to funding for clinical trials is super important. Yes, I know, 15 million Australian dollars isn't much, but if we put enough drops in the bucket, eventually the bucket will be full. And second, this is important because it will accelerate the process of getting these people the help that they need. Just in Australia alone, there are 4 million people who currently suffer with mental health disorders, and that is in a country of only 24 million people. So getting these people the help that they deserve is essential. Our second story of the day comes from the United States of America, specifically the state of Rhode Island. In this state, lawmakers have recently introduced a bill to decriminalize all drugs. And under this bill, which is likely to pass, the state will treat drug possession as a civil offense rather than a criminal offense. And instead of jail time, there will instead be a $100 fine imposed for the possession of a small amount of any illicit drug. And in some cases, community service or mandatory drug rehabilitation programs can also be ordered by a judge. So I know some of you are saying right now, but James, there's only like 12 and a half people and a goat in Rhode Island. Why are we talking about Rhode Island? And I get it, there's not many people there. But what is important here is a trend line in the United States. More and more states are doing their part to help end the war on drugs. And this is essential for so many reasons. And Rhode Island is joining many other states such as New York, California, Texas, Massachusetts, Kansas, and Washington State who have filed similar bills, though of course not all of them are going to pass. In particular, Texas's bill probably won't pass. And on top of the many human benefits these bills will bring, ending the drug war is also essential. It's an essential first step to the normalization of using psychedelic drugs as medicines. So this isn't going to help us psychedelic investors directly, but rather it's going to help set up a societal context which will be beneficial to us in the long term. So moving over one state, we're going to look at some events that are happening in New York. There, a lawmaker has filed a bill to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms, and this comes on top of another bill from that state, which aims to decriminalize all drugs there, and instead of jail time, it will impose fines like Rhode Island is considering. But the purpose of this particular bill is to allow for more research into psilocybin to treat mental health issues. So if this passes, we'll continue to see more research being conducted on these substances, which is of course great news for all of us investors in this field. So it seems that every single week nowadays I'm covering more and more decriminalization efforts, both in the United States and around the world. And the speed at which this is happening is really starting to shock me, if I'm being completely honest. And of course, not all of these bills are going to pass, but some of them will. And this is making me realize that we are in the beginning, the very starting of a full-on revolution. after existing since the beginning of the Nixon era, it truly does look like the war on drugs is just starting to come to an end. It's beginning to close. And obviously much more needs to be done. We could be at the beginning of a decades-long process, but for the first time, it looks like we are moving in the right direction. And more than just moving in the right direction, it looks like we're moving quickly. And on top of the ongoing decriminalization efforts that are happening, every week it seems like we are seeing more and more funding announcements for clinical trials into the effectiveness of psychedelic compounds to treat mental health issues. So here too, we are seeing an acceleration. And the reason that I am spending so much time talking about these issues is that in order for us to make money, like we are investors, this is an investor's channel, so in order for us to make money into the psychedelics landscape, both the legal and the societal framework when it comes to these drugs needs to change. And it appears that it's starting to change. It appears that we are undergoing a paradigm shift when it comes to these issues. More and more of these substances are being viewed as medicines as opposed to addictions. In 10 years, it seems very possible that many health issues will be treated with these very psychedelic substances that are currently illegal. And this means that there is a giant once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here for investors who get in at the ground floor. The only issue, of course, is choosing the right companies 5 to 10 years in advance. And that brings us to our company-specific news. So we're going to start, as we always do, with my favorite company in the field, MindMed. And for those of you who don't know, MindMed's ticker symbol is MMEDF on the American OTC market, MMED on the Canadian NEO market, and MMQ on the European Frankfurt Exchange. And just as a quick side note for everybody, for this video, we're going to be using all of the American terms and the American tickers, so whenever I throw a number or figure out there, just assume that it's in American dollars unless I say otherwise. So getting back on track here, MindMed stock this week, it traded sideways. It opened Monday at $2.80, and it closed Friday at $2.79. So I hope you don't miss that penny. And it makes sense that it traded sideways this week because there wasn't really any news. The only event of note this week for MindMed was they set the date, or they filed the date for their annual general meeting, which will include a quote-unquote special meeting. And this will take place on May 27th, and at the moment I have zero idea what the special meeting portion of the meeting is going to be, or if it's going to be important. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and if we get any updates on that, we'll give that to you also. And hopefully this event will have video to it so we can live stream it and bring you guys all the information, but my kind of gut feeling is it will just be a audio only call. So if that's the case, then we'll probably just talk about it. And also, I'm not sure if this is when we're going to be getting Q4 financial updates as well. So we're just going to have to wait for MindMed to give a written update and comment on what this meeting will be about. And who knows, maybe they'll do this before you guys even see the video, but hopefully they don't. So yeah, that's all the news we have for this week for MindMed. Like I said, it was a slow week, and we're going to be moving on. So next up, we're going to be looking at Compass Pathways, which is ticker symbol CMPS on the NASDAQ exchange. And for Compass, there was literally no news this week, but we're still going to take a brief look at their stock price. So Compass opened Monday at $41, and it closed Friday at $39.25. So like MindMed, it traded sideways for the entire week. And since nothing of note happened, the loss that we saw is just based on like speculation and wider market effects. It's just normal noise, essentially. Moving on, the next company we're going to talk about is Atai Life Sciences. And as a reminder, Atai is not yet public, but they intend to go public later this year. And when they do, because of their expansive clinical trial pipeline and their financial situation, they got lots of money in the bank, they're going to automatically be, at a minimum, they're going to be in a consideration for the title of the #1 psychedelic medicines company. And some would say they would be the clear-cut frontrunner for this. And just something important to note, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, when we're looking at Atai, it's better to conceptualize it rather than as one unitary company like MindMed, as 9+ different companies all working under the same umbrella that is Atai. And all of these companies are working to solve their own problems with their own solutions. So the news that we have this week comes from one of their subsidiaries that's called Perception Neuroscience. And the news is that Perception is entering a partnership with the Japanese conglomerate Otsuka Pharmaceutical. And this is to treat depression disorders with Perception's PCN 101 molecule, a derivative of R-ketamine. And I'm going to read you the most important paragraph of the press release where they announced this partnership. So, under the terms of the license, Otsuka will have exclusive rights to develop and commercialize products containing PCN 101 in Japan. Otsuka will undertake development, regulatory, and commercialization activities in Japan with input and guidance from both companies. Perception will receive an upfront payment of $20 million, which will help fund the company's overall development treatments. In addition, Perception will be eligible to receive development, regulatory, and commercial milestones, as well as tiered double-digit royalties on future sales. So, this is extremely important and fantastic and exciting, primarily because it gives Atai a funding mechanism that doesn't involve dilution or debt. So in this case, the company's subsidiary, Perception, they now have $20 million to continue research and development on their molecule, PCN 101, and they didn't have to give any of the company up to get this funding. On top of that, the partnership is going to transfer knowledge and expertise to the company through working with the conglomerate that is Otsuka. And I would love to see other companies like MindMed try to strike up similar agreements with companies like Otsuka with their compounds such as 18MC. So companies like MindMed, to achieve funding that they're at, raising money is essential. So I don't bemoan the fact usually when they raise funding and there's dilution. That's just a normal part of the game. But Atai here, they are showing that there is another way. And I think other companies should look into trying to mimic this. So getting back to the molecule at hand, PCN 101, just a paragraph from this press release describing what it is, or not what it is, but rather the stage it's currently at. So they say that a phase 1 single ascending dose study has been completing for PCN 101, and a phase 2 proof of concept study in TRD, treatment-resistant depression, is planned to be initiated by Perception in the first half of 2021. So we're still probably a few years away from knowing if this drug works well, but nevertheless, for everybody who wants to invest in Atai when the company eventually goes public, this is very good news. And like I said last week, it seems like every single week we're getting news on one of Atai's many subsidiaries, and they all seem to be moving ahead at full steam all the time. So again, this is extremely exciting. And of course, I haven't invested in Atai yet because they're not public, but as soon as they go public, I plan to make an initial investment. So moving on, our next story of the day comes from a company called Fieldtrip, and Fieldtrip is ticker FTRPF on the OTC and FTRP on the Canadian CSE. And Fieldtrip traded down on the week a little bit. It opened Monday at $5.14 and it closed Friday at $4.53. So the news that we got this week for the company is that Fieldtrip has announced the closing of a financial deal worth $76 million. And this money is going to be used to expand the company's psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy clinics across North America and the development of Fieldtrip's lead drug candidate FT104. And the company is aiming to have 75 clinics in North America by 2024, so that money is going to be very useful to helping see this vision through. And just very briefly on Fieldtrip's proprietary FT104 compound, it has similarities with psychedelic compounds like psilocybin and DMT. However, the novel compound has yet to go through clinical trials, so still a long way to go. And the most important thing that Fieldtrip released here is that the capital raising has now brought the company's cash on hand to an amazing $91.5 million USD. And this means that Fieldtrip will have the capital needed to fund their projects, to fund their research, to fund their clinical trials. As I say ad nauseum every week on this channel, doing these clinical trials is super expensive, and any company that doesn't have the capital needed to run them at best is just aspirational. So when you see all these companies that are kind of popping up in the psychedelic medicine space, and they say like lots of rosy, amazing things, we're going to solve addiction, we're going to solve mental health care, but then they only have $2 million in the bank, they ain't solving shit. I don't know if we're going to have to beep that out or not, but we'll see. But yeah, if you have no money in the bank, you're not solving anything. So one of the most important things you need to look at, as well as clinical trials, is how much money they have in the bank. And with this deal, raising the cash on hand to $91.5 million USD, Fieldtrip has now brought themselves into the big boys league. They now have enough money to be mentioned in the same conversation as MindMed, as Atai. I mean, to be fair, they still only have about half as much money as those companies do, but $91 million, that's a lot of money. It can fund a lot of things. So I, at the moment, have no investments in Fieldtrip, but this makes them a lot more worthy of consideration, and perhaps in the future I will buy some. So moving on, next we're going to talk about Numinus Wellness, which is ticker symbol LKYSF on the OTC market, and NUMI on the TSX. And LKYSF traded down on the week, opening Monday at 95 cents and closing Friday at 92 cents. And the news we want to talk about today is Numinus also has announced a closing of a bought deal financing deal. They raised $40 million, and this one is in Canadian dollars, by the way, and this brings the company's total cash on hand to $65 million Canadian, which is about 52 million USD. So again, this is dilution, but it is necessary, and this puts their cash at hand at a very respectable number. This isn't as much as Fieldtrip has, and definitely not as much as MindMed or Atai or Compass or Cybin has, but it's a start. And $53 million, it's nothing to scoff at, or 52 million, sorry, is nothing to scoff at. That is enough to get solid start on a lot of different projects, clinical trials. Yes, they're going to have to raise more money soon, but this is a solid start. They're starting to have the capital needed to fund their projects. So if I was a Numinus shareholder right now, which I'm not, but I might be in the future one day, who knows, I would be happy with this deal. Moving on, the last company we're going to look at today is Cybin, which is ticker symbol CLXPF on the OTC market and CYBN on the NEO exchange. And CLXPF actually finished up on the week, lo and behold, the only company that we're covering to actually finish up on the week. It opened Monday at $1.20, and it closed Friday at $1.26. So the news we have for you today is that Cybin released a press release where they said that they're progressing 2 psychedelic investigational new drug candidates, and they also announced that they have completed their 20th preclinical study. So what's important here is that Cybin will be moving 2 proprietary drugs, CYB003 and CYB004, towards clinical trials in the near future. And as a side note, I'm just going to rant for a second. I really wish that these psychedelic medicines companies would start giving their molecules cool names rather than just random things like CYB004 or TP001 or whatever. It makes it really hard to remember which company has which compound and what compound does what thing, especially when they're really close and one's like 003 and one's 004. So long story short, companies, start naming your molecules cool things. End of rant, getting back to the story here. So Fieldtrip says they also have 50 proprietary compounds, though to be clear, that doesn't mean that Fieldtrip is ever going to commercialize 50 different medicines. Most of these will never make it through clinical trials, and in fact, many of them or most of them might never even make it to the clinical trial phase in the first place. But nevertheless, it's very cool that they have 50 compounds and that 2 of them seem to be moving towards clinical trials. We also don't know what maladies Cybin is planning on treating with these 2 different compounds, CYB003 and CYB004. All they announced in the press release is that it's going to be tested in treating serious psychiatric conditions with high unmet medical needs. So all in all, their progress is exciting. We still don't know more than we know, but again, if I was a Cybin shareholder at this moment, I would be happy with the progress. So zooming out for a second here, we can see the 2 big trends on the week were that more jurisdictions are moving towards more liberalized drug policy, and more individual companies are getting the funding required to play in this field. This means that we are likely to see healthy competition in the psychedelic medicines field going forward. Originally, there was just 2 or 3 companies operating in a non-hospitable climate, but over the past couple of months, more and more companies have gotten the funding that they need to run their clinical trials, and the societal context has really started to open up. And as I said in the intro in the beginning, it's starting to open up very quickly. It seems that every week a new place is planning on decriminalizing drugs. So while this is very good news for the world, because there's going to be more competition in the space, and more competition means that there's a higher likelihood that one or several of these drugs end up being effective, it does make it harder for us investors in this field, because now we have to choose the winners of this field, who the winners are going to be in 5-10 years, half a decade to a decade in advance. And that's a lot easier when there's only 2 to 3 companies playing. But if there's going to be 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 players playing in this field, it makes it very hard to figure out who the winners are going to be. So I guess what I'm saying is the recent news over the past couple weeks have actually made me start thinking a lot more seriously about investing in the Psych ETF, which is on the NEO exchange. Because originally, if you remember in my Psych video that I did a few months ago or a month ago, I was saying that most of the companies that were included in this exchange, they didn't really have the capital needed to fund any of their projects. They were all aspirational. Well, now it's starting to look like these companies have the funding to do it, and they have cool molecules to do research on. So as more of these companies become more financially stable and progress towards clinical trials, this ETF is becoming more and more seductive to me. And I really think that sometime in the near future, let's say a month or two, I might make an initial investment in the ETF. And yeah, so guys, that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm. And if you want to see more of me, click on some of the videos you see on your screen now. This is James from the Psychedelic Investor, signing out. I'll see you next time.